Every morning, the team at the Exchange meets to talk over the top stories of the day. Here's a look at what we think makes the cut.
Tim Hortons profit was down, and they're claiming it was related to the Burger King deal.
Russia's banning the iPhone and the iPad and anything related to the cloud. I like the Uber story.
In Vancouver, they're trying to block it entirely. They're not saying, let's regulate it, let's look at a way we can make it work. They're saying, we just don't want this here at all.
Burger King's deal to buy Tim Hortons is eating into the Canadian company's bottom line. Tim's profit dropped 14% in the most recent quarter, hit with more than $27 million in costs related to the transaction. Investors seem pretty tolerant to the news. The company's stock was on the plus side in trading today, and it's up more than 50% since the deal was announced in August. Tim's isn't the only company to tack on a big one-time charge to an earnings report lately. IBM took a $4.7 billion charge in a deal to pay a company to take over its semiconductor chip division. Earlier this year, Facebook bought WhatsApp for $21.8 billion and wrote off $15.3 billion of that as goodwill recently. Yesterday, Scotiabank announced it will take a $451 million one-time charge to restructure operations in Venezuela and the Caribbean. Charges like those don't appear to be slowing down the overall momentum of stock markets. The S&P 500 and the Dow ended last week at record highs. In our meeting, we debated if there's ever a good time to throw bad news at investors. I did wonder the other day, actually, because investors seem unwilling to sell stocks for any reason, whether companies aren't doing a little bit of that, taking charges and write-offs, not unlike the write-down that Facebook took.
Well, you generally are more willing to take those one-time charges when times are good, right?
No.
Yes.
Well,
because investors won't beat you up over it.
But it's a risk. To me, it does say something about the frothiness or craziness of the markets. Meanwhile, the most powerful person in the world, Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is according to Forbes magazine. He took the top spot in its ranking for the second year in a row. That could come as a surprise to some this time around. Russia annexed Crimea and has been at the center of tensions with Europe over natural gas supplies. Those were both points Forbes pointed to in support of its decision. It called Putin an undisputed, unpredictable, and unaccountable head, unconstrained by world opinions in pursuit of its goals. There are reports Putin has a new goal: to use his power to control the cloud. Reports suggest Russia is introducing a new law that will force online companies to store their data domestically. Apple's iCloud, for example, would be cut off unless Apple moved its data storage to Russia. In the meeting, we discussed the effect that could have if Russia takes its country out of the cloud. The thing that's extraordinary about it is, you know the old expression, cutting off your nose to spite your face. What a thing to do to your people. Send them back 50 years.
It made me think of the days when Russians yearned for Levi's jeans, and now they're going to be sitting there yearning for the cloud.
If they actually follow through, I think it would be hard to quantify the number of businesses that now rely on cloud-based services every day in little ways, and all of us do, without even realizing that it's happening. Elsewhere, Vancouver taxis are trying to hit the brakes on Uber's plans to enter that city once again. Uber tried in 2012, was pushed out because it couldn't get a license. Uber tweeted about a possible return. In response, 4 Vancouver taxis filed a lawsuit to keep the ride-sharing service out. Uber already operates in more than 200 cities, including 3 Canadian locations: Toronto, Montreal, and Halifax. Vancouver is hardly the first city to resist it. Taxi drivers in Sacramento, London, Paris, San Francisco have each protested against the service. They claim the company breaks local taxi rules and threatens taxi drivers' livelihoods. Uber allows users to order rides through an app. It doesn't have its own cars. Instead, it connects the passenger to an independent driver for hire registered with Uber. They say that's why cars don't have to be certified or licensed as taxis. Traditional taxi drivers who have to pay for their licenses claim Uber is bad for business and customers because of the lack of oversight.
They're undercutting the industry. There's no proof that the vehicles are legally safe to be on the road.
The BC government says it's ready to send out undercover cops to catch and fine unlicensed Uber drivers if the service launches there. The province's NDP leader wants to raise the maximum fine for operating without a permit from $5,000 to $20,000.
I believe Uber should be here to keep that competition fierce so that you can drive costs down for consumers, but they don't want to play by any rules.
In a statement, an Uber spokesman said that the lawsuit in BC is a prime example of the Vancouver taxi industry's singular goal: protecting its own cartel. In the meeting, we discussed whether regulation and innovation mix very well.
It's a total suppression of an innovation that is changing the industry and making it better. People love the service.
This is also the case with Airbnb. Do we think that no industry should be regulated?
Isn't the very definition of disruptive technology? This is what's supposed to happen in capitalism, but we're basically saying, no, it's not going to happen in this case because it's a very regulated industry.
Yes, technological disruption is the way of progress, but as citizens, we also slow it. We say, technically, you can steal music because it's very easy to download, but as a society, we've decided that is still wrong, and we'd like to put safeguards in to make sure people don't do it or try to make sure they don't do it. To me, it's in that category. And we do license things for a reason. Are we saying we want to toss it out?
So we're at the Napster stage. We haven't reached the Spotify stage of this taxi argument.
Right. The Napster stage. Bruce Sellery is author of the Moolah Guide to Rocking RSP. Where are you on Uber? First of all, disclosure, I've never used it. So
You've never used it. I've never used it, but when we were in San Francisco, Lyft was everywhere. It's the one with the pink mustaches on it. I love disruptive technologies, period.
Yes.
Even knowing that they harm a lot of people who work in established industries, and certainly media is one of them. But if you think about iTunes, Netflix, all those kinds of things, I think in the end, we're better for consumers. And I can't think of a reason why you would want to safeguard the oligopoly of the taxi service in Vancouver.
Well, to get to that answer, you'd have to say, why do we license these things at all? And if we don't think, and this is the point that I was trying to raise earlier, is, and I'm not saying Uber shouldn't exist, and I'm not saying disruptive technology isn't wonderful. It tends to be the way progress happens, and incumbents don't like it because it undermines their business. We get that. But the fact is, we do license things and regulate things for a reason. So are we saying we don't want to license this business? Is there no reason to license Uber? Should they not have a level playing field?
Or are we saying, do we still need to license it in that way? Because one of the things that they raised in the piece was safety, insurance, all those kinds of standards. Uber's willing to play on those regulations. And in fact, if you look at their model, I would feel more comfortable with an Uber driver than just any old taxi driver because of the data. So, you know, when you take an Uber ride, not only is your ride captured electronically, you get to rate that driver. And if their rating drops below a certain threshold, then they don't work there anymore. They also get to rate you. So there's tremendous amount of data. And what Uber would say is that they adhere to all the insurance and driver regulations. So I don't know where the truth is on that front. But what's amazing is their technology. There is a way for them to, that they have innovated the industry that I think is great for consumers.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're seeing more and more of, and this is true of Airbnb, and it's true if the driverless car happens, is we're finding a way, or car sharing, to use underutilized assets more. In other words, monetize or share the use of an asset that otherwise would be sitting idle. And from an economics point of view, there's something quite beautiful about that, right? It's creating value out of thin air where there had not been value. So I wouldn't argue that point. I guess all I would say is this idea that simply because the technology allows something to be possible, therefore it should happen. I'd go back to the music example, the Napster to Spotify. There may be an evolution. I'm not saying incumbents should always be protected by regulation, by the commissions that are currently keeping a cartel together, but I am saying as citizens we should say, why did we regulate them that way? Is it the regulations that need to innovate, or do we need to take a pause here and say, how are we going to regulate Uber?
And I think the answer is no pause required.
No pause.
Thanks so much.
Full steam
Let's
ahead.
look at the 200 cities where this is working and where it's doing really, really well for consumers. And I think providing people with a way to travel that's safe and easy, that is, sure, it's a premium versus public transit, but it absolutely has a role.
So let me ask you something else. What do we do about the folks that have invested heavily in their cars, their taxi licenses, which are expensive, huge asset purchases?
Those medallions cost a lot
Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Absolutely. And Uber doesn't catch on immediately and transform everything immediately, but the value of those medallions, those licenses, is going to decline over time. 'Twas ever thus with oligopolies that faded into the ether. Eventually they go away.
I mean, I think the demand for this service is so clear. It's clearly kind of tapped into something, not least that the cartel kept prices too high. So taxi fees may come down. I will tell you one thing I've noticed. Anecdotal. But when you actually get, there are very few reasons to actually hire somebody to drive you somewhere, right? Safety usually is one of them. You're going somewhere you don't think you should be driving. Or distance, in my case, because I don't want to fall asleep at the wheel. And in that case, like in a couple of occasions, the driver has fallen asleep. And I strongly suspect it's because the limo drivers are actually moonlighting as Uber drivers.
Oh, really?
And they're working around the clock.
Oh, my gosh. Well, I do have one final point here in terms of my framework. we were renting, subletting our New York City apartment in 2002.
You're
so
way ahead of
long
the curve.
before Airbnb, and we rent our cottage as well. I am a huge believer in underutilized
I don't know what
capacity.
the statute of limitations on that is, but that's illegal. What, that you were
In
doing.
2002?
Yeah.
Who said?
Well, did your landlord know you were subletting?
Yeah, totally.
You
He
signed
was there
over-
when we did it.
You signed over the lease to
Are you
somebody
bringing
else?
this up now? Statute of limitations is passed.
I'm just saying.
Everyone did it on Craigslist back then.
Craigslist
Totally
did not
appropriate.
exist back then.
In 2002?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Fact checker. 2002,
We'll get to the bottom of it. I'm
Craigslist didn't.
fairly certain it did not.
Oh yeah, you're totally wrong
I
on
don't
that.
think so. We're going to check.
Okay.
But we've actually exhausted the facts, so we're going to go.